Let's explain this in a simple way, line by line, so it's easy to understand. The Swadeshi movement brings many people into politics. 1. The Swadeshi movement had many activities and goals. It wasn't just about one thing. It included promoting Indian-made goods, self-reliance, and national education. 2. For the first time, the Swadeshi movement brought many different groups of people into politics. Before this, only a few people were involved in political activities in India, but now larger groups began to actively participate. 3. The movement also spread modern political ideas to even more people. People who had never thought about nationalism, the idea that India should be ruled by Indians, or freedom, were now learning about these things. Who joined the Swadeshi movement? 4. The movement was supported by a wide range of people. Zamindars, landowners, lower middle class people from cities and small towns, lots of students from schools and colleges. 5. For the first time, even women left their homes to join the movement. Women participated in marches called processions and protests called picketing against British goods. Swadeshi movement and the working class. 6. The movement also helped address the problems faced by the working class, people who worked in factories or other jobs for wages. Before this, the working class didn't have much of a political voice. 7. Some Swadeshi leaders, who were influenced by ideas from socialist countries like Germany and Russia, started organizing strikes, work stoppages. These strikes happened in foreign-run companies like the Eastern Indian Railway and Clive Jute Mills. Strikes were a way for workers to protest against their working conditions and wages. Involving peasants in the Swadeshi movement. 8. Some people argue that the Swadeshi movement did not reach many peasants, farmers, especially the poorer peasants. The movement was successful in certain areas like Barisal, a district in Bengal, but it didn't spread to all peasants across India. Number 9. However, even if the movement only mobilized peasants, farmers in one area, it was still very important. This was because the peasants' involvement in the Swadeshi movement was the first step toward involving large masses of people in modern Indian politics. 10. Even after the Swadeshi movement, political activity among the peasantry, farmers, was still strongest in certain areas. This means that in future movements, peasants participated most actively in some specific regions. How peasants were involved in politics. 11. During the Swadeshi movement, the peasants were not always organized around their own specific problems, like land or crop issues. In many areas, peasants did not join in certain forms of protest, like boycotting British goods or passive resistance, peaceful refusal to cooperate with the British. 12. But many peasants were introduced to nationalist ideas for the first time through things like meetings, jatras, folk theater performances, and social work. Peasants were exposed to new ideas about nationalism and freedom. Key points to remember. The Swadeshi movement was a major turning point because it brought many different groups, landowners, lower middle class people, students, and women into political activities. It also introduced the working class and peasants, farmers, to modern political ideas for the first time. Even though peasants were not fully mobilized across the country, their limited participation marked the beginning of modern mass politics in India. Strikes were organized in foreign-owned businesses to protest against unfair working conditions. If you want more examples or have any other questions, feel free to ask.
Let's break this down step by step in the simplest way so you can easily understand. The main problem with the Swadeshi movement. 1. The main weakness of the Swadeshi movement was that it did not get support from Muslims. This means that many Muslims, especially Muslim farmers, did not join the movement. 2. One reason for this was that the British government was trying to divide Hindus and Muslims. The British used communalism, making people focus on their religious differences to turn Muslims away from the Swadeshi movement. 3. In Bengal, the situation was already tense. because Hindus and Muslims were divided by class. In many places, Hindus were the landlords, the rich people who owned the land. Muslims were mostly the peasants, the farmers who worked on the land. This created economic tension between the two groups. The British divide Muslims and Hindus. 4. At this time, the British government supported the creation of the All India Muslim League. The Muslim League was a political group that worked to represent Muslim interests. The British actively helped the Muslim League to create a division between Hindus and Muslims. 5. In Bengal, the British used people like Nawab Salimullah of Dhaka to oppose the Swadeshi movement. Nawab Salimullah was a Muslim leader who supported the British and did not support the Swadeshi movement. The British also used religious leaders like mullahs and maulvis, Muslim religious teachers. These leaders encouraged Muslims to stay away from the Swadeshi movement. Communal riots in Bengal. 7. As a result of the British plan, communal riots, fights between Hindus and Muslims, broke out in Bengal. This happened at the peak of the Swadeshi movement. The British exploited the religious differences between Hindus and Muslims to weaken the movement. Example to help understand. Imagine you and your friend are fighting for something good, like equal rights at school. But another person who doesn't like your cause starts spreading rumours to turn your friend against you. This is exactly what the British did. They spread divisions between Hindus and Muslims to weaken the Swadeshi movement. Key points. The Swadeshi movement failed to get Muslim support, especially from Muslim peasants. The British government used communalism to divide Muslims and Hindus. In Bengal, Hindus were landlords and Muslims were peasants, which added to the tension. The British helped create the Muslim League and supported Muslim leaders like Nawab Salimullah to oppose the movement. Communal riots, fights between Hindus and Muslims, broke out, which weakened the Swadeshi movement. If you have more questions or want further clarification, feel free to ask. Alright, let's break it down even more slowly and clearly, explaining each part step by step. Background and mobilization in the Swadeshi movement. The Swadeshi movement was about using Indian-made goods and rejecting British goods. It was also about fighting for India's freedom from British rule. To gather more people into this movement, the leaders used things people loved and understood, like festivals, celebrations, and cultural events. For example, if people gathered for a festival, Swadeshi leaders would talk to them about why they should fight the British. 2. Traditional customs and festivals. The Swadeshi leaders used familiar customs and traditions to get people interested. They wanted to make the movement feel like it was part of everyone's life. Example. Imagine you love attending a local festival every year. Now, the festival also teaches you about how you can fight for your country's freedom. This makes you feel that fighting for freedom is part of your everyday life. Problem of misunderstanding and communalism. 3. Communalists misinterpreted these events. Communalists are people who try to create conflict between religious groups like Hindus and Muslims. They wanted to divide people rather than unite them. They started saying, these festivals are only for Hindus or only for Muslims, even though they were meant for everyone. Example. Imagine someone says, this festival is only for students from one class, not for all students, even though it's for everyone. This makes people feel divided. 4. The British supported these communalists. The British government liked this division because it weakened the Swadeshi movement. Why? Because when people fight each other, they're not united to fight the British. So the British encouraged these ideas to make sure Hindus and Muslims didn't fight together for freedom. Government suppression and repression. 5. The movement slows down in 1908. By mid-1908, the Swadeshi movement started to lose its energy. People weren't as involved as they were before. This happened because the British government started to use force to stop the movement. Repression means using power or force to control or stop something. 6. The British stopped meetings and marches. The British government saw the movement was growing and it scared them because they knew it could lead to rebellion or revolution. They banned public meetings so people couldn't gather and talk, and they stopped marches so people couldn't walk together to protest. They also censored the press. Newspapers couldn't write about the movement. 7. Punishment for students. Many students were part of the Swadeshi movement, but the British government punished them. Students were expelled from schools and colleges, kicked out. They were not allowed to get government jobs. They were fined, made to pay money. Some were even beaten up by the police. Example: if you're protesting in your school, the principal might punish you by not allowing you back to school, stopping you from getting jobs later, or even physically hurting you. 8. The Barisal Conference incident. In 1906, there was a big meeting called the Bharat, where many people came together to discuss the Swadeshi movement. The British police broke up the meeting using force. They didn't just stop the meeting, they also attacked the people and beat them up. This showed how far the British were willing to go to crush the movement. Why the Swadeshi movement lost power. 9. Repression was a key reason the movement slowed down. The British used force to stop the Swadeshi movement from growing any stronger. This made it harder for people to stay involved. When students were being kicked out of school and people were being beaten up, it scared many people. They started to back off and the movement lost momentum. 10. Government's goal. The British didn't want the movement to succeed because it would threaten their rule over India. By banning meetings, punishing students, and using police force, they were trying to make sure the Swadeshi movement didn't grow any further. Example to help understand. Imagine if a group of students in your school wanted to protest for better school facilities, and they used a popular school event like Sports Day to get everyone's attention. They tell you that if everyone stands together, the school management will listen. But then some other students start saying, this protest is only for students in the sports teams, even though it's actually for everyone. This makes some students feel excluded and they don't join the protest. Now the school management hears about the protest and doesn't like it. They ban all future sports day events and stop the students from meeting or marching in the playground. They even punish the students who started the protest by expelling them from school or making them pay fines. Some of the students are even beaten up by security. After this, many students are too scared to continue protesting and the movement loses energy. This is what happened to the Swadeshi movement when the British used repression to break it down. Key points recap. 1. The Swadeshi movement used festivals and traditions to gather people. 2. Communalists and the British government divided people by saying these events were only for one religion. 3. By 1908, the movement slowed down because of government repression. 4. The British banned public meetings, punished students, and used police force to break up the movement. 5. The 1906 Barisal Conference is an example where the British used violence to stop the movement. 6. Repression and fear made it hard for people to continue fighting in the movement. I hope this helps. Feel free to ask any more questions if something is unclear or if you want more details. Let's break this down step by step in the simplest way possible. Number 1. Internal fights and the Congress split in 1907. Congress split in 1907. The Congress Party, which was the biggest party fighting for India's freedom, had internal fights in 1907. It split into two groups. This made the party weaker and less united. When people are fighting among themselves, they can't focus on the real fight against the British. Why did this hurt the movement? Because the Congress Party was a leader of the Swadeshi movement. When it became weaker, the Swadeshi movement also became weaker. Other parts of India weren't ready. Although the Swadeshi movement had spread to other parts of India, most of the country was not fully ready for this new type of politics. This means that the movement was strongest in Bengal, but it didn't get the same kind of support in other places. What did this mean for the British government? These two things, the split in Congress and the fact that the rest of India wasn't fully ready, made it easier for the British government to stop the movement. 2. The British government's response, 1907 to 1908, targeting leaders. Between 1907 and 1908, the British government started going after the leaders of the Swadeshi movement. They sent out of the country important leaders from Bengal like Ashwini Kumar Dutt and Krishna Kumar Mitra. Tilak, a strong leader from Maharashtra, was jailed for 6 years. Leaders from Punjab like Ajit Singh and Lala Lajpat Rai were deported. Leaders from Madras and Andhra like Chidambaram Pillai and Harisarvottam Rao were arrested. Why did they do this? The British government believed that if they removed the leaders, the movement would fall apart. And that's exactly what happened. 3. Leaders retired from politics. Bipin Chandra Pal and Aurobindo Ghosh, two of the most important leaders, Bipin Chandra Pal and Aurobindo Ghosh, decided to leave politics during this time. This was partly because of the harsh measures taken by the British government. With leaders gone, the movement lost direction and started to fall apart. 4. The movement had no strong organisation, no centralised leadership. The Swadeshi movement was not well organised. There wasn't a strong structure or a central team to manage everything. They used Gandhian techniques. The movement used many techniques that Mahatma Gandhi would later use. Passive resistance, protesting without violence. Non-violent non-cooperation, refusing to cooperate with the British peacefully. Asking people to go to jail to show they were ready to sacrifice. Working on social reforms, changing society for the better. Doing constructive work, building schools, helping communities, etc. But they couldn't execute these ideas well. Even though these were good ideas, the movement couldn't organise them in a way that would be effective or widespread. Gandhi would later be able to turn these ideas into practical actions, but the Swadeshi movement struggled to do that. 5. Mass movements can't last forever. Mass movements burn out. Large, intense movements like the Swadeshi movement can't stay at high energy forever. People can't keep making big sacrifices for a long time without taking a break. When the British government used repression, harsh actions like arrests and beatings, it became harder for people to keep up their efforts. Sometimes movements need to pause, regroup and prepare for the next round of the fight. 6. The rise of revolutionary nationalism. What happened after the movement declined? Even though the Swadeshi movement started to decline, something new began to rise. Revolutionary nationalism. What is revolutionary nationalism? This was the idea that some people, especially the youth, didn't want to just quietly go back to their normal lives after the movement weakened. They were frustrated and wanted to keep fighting, but now in a more direct and violent way. Individual heroism. Some of these young people turned to individual heroism. This means that instead of working in big groups or mass movements, they decided to take individual actions. They wanted to do something heroic on their own, even if it was dangerous. Example, imagine you were part of a big school protest and the protest starts to fall apart. But you're still angry and want to make a difference. So you decide to do something brave and risky all by yourself, like challenging the school's unfair rules directly. Recap 1. Internal fighting and Congress split. In 1907, the Congress Party split and started fighting among themselves. This made the Swadeshi movement weaker. 2. The rest of India wasn't ready. The movement spread outside Bengal, but the rest of India wasn't ready for this new type of protest yet. 3. Government repression. between 1907 and 1908, the British government deported, jailed, or arrested the leaders of the movement, making it leaderless. 4. No strong organization. The movement didn't have a strong central organization or structure. It used good techniques like passive resistance, but couldn't turn these ideas into effective action. 5. Movements can't last forever. Mass movements can't stay strong forever. When the British government used harsh measures, the movement started to fade away. 6. Revolutionary nationalism. After the Swadeshi movement declined, some youth turned to violent actions and individual heroism to keep fighting. I hope this simplified explanation helps you understand the whole process. Let me know if you have any more questions or need further clarification.